Ask Reddit by Basil Tripod 9684. What's the worst financial decision you've seen someone make? I knew someone who got a loan for their wedding, but decided to blow it all at a casino. Now they have a loan for $20k to pay off and nothing to show for it. I knew a woman whose fiancé was a gambling addict. He promised to clean up his act, but somehow got a hold of their savings for the wedding. All of it. Gambled the entire lot. Needless to say, they aren't married. A friend of mine who is very bad with money and his girlfriend bought some sort of water filtration system from a door-to-door salesman. He has to pay something like $300 a month for this filtration system. He was all stoked because it came with a free set of pots and pans. Fast forward a year and his girlfriend has broken up with him, moved out of the house, and he's had to sell his home because he can't afford to live there. The water filtration system is now sitting in a storage unit where he still pays $300 a month for it because he's on a 2 or 3 year contract. Sorry, the details are fuzzy. We have great water quality in my area. I work for a government agency in building maintenance. We get hit up by water filter and air filter clowns every couple months wanting to sell us some bullshit. We are obligated to sit through their sales pitch so we aren't biased, but we all know it's bullshit snake oil. The homes and buildings that do need specialized systems like these usually have them installed on day one. A co-worker I used to have worked every second of overtime he could for several years to save up for a house. When he applied for the house loan, he based his mortgage payment on all of the overtime he had been working. I tried to tell him that wasn't a good idea, but he didn't want to hear it. He ended up divorced a few years later because his wife got tired of him always working. When my wife and I bought our house, we based it off of just my income, so if she lost her job or I lost mine we would be fine. Everyone told us we should get a super nice house with our income since we could afford it. 2 years later my wife lost her job and now we have nothing to worry about. No added stress. It was the best decision we have made. A guy in my fraternity got $30k for an undisclosed reason. I'm guessing a family death or something, and he bet it all on the Yankees winning one game. They lost. A guy who lived on my floor in the dorms inherited $100k from his grandfather's estate. He was suddenly very popular, buying all the beer, pizza, new car, golf clubs, etc. He was living large. His parents showed up about a month later to attempt to help straighten him out and recover funds. The golf clubs and other items went to a pawn shop and they even enlisted the RA to help watch out for the guy. Terrible for an 18-19 years old to come into that kind of money out of nowhere with no reference or respect for how to handle it or how it was earned. My maternal grandmother bought an 8-plex to avoid capital gains when she sold her large house. The apartment complex was in the red and needed a lot of repairs. She hired my father to do them and be on-site manager. The place started making money. My mom, divorced from my dad, was mad that my grandma bought it in the first place, then hired my dad, then was proved wrong because it was making money. My grandma was in her 90s and my mom pressured her for years, so my grandma finally sold it. That place is in a high market area and is now worth millions. My mom made a poor financial decision based on petty spite. Almost as if financial decisions shouldn't be made based on who hates whom. A dude who owned a small convenience store in our town spent like $20,000 on fidget spinners. He was posting for like a year begging people to buy them as he would lose his business and his marriage was falling apart due to it. Why in the world would he need that many fidget spinners? My supervisor took out a loan against their $401k to pay their rent because their credit cards were maxed. 2 weeks later, they bought a brand new $60k Lincoln with basically nothing down because her daughter just had a baby and I need a bigger car for that. I sat down with a guy to help him figure things out. He had a fair amount of credit card debt but nothing impossible. Just by consolidating it on a new card with 0% interest for even a year it'd have seen amazing progress. Seemed like he had taken my advice. Next I saw him, it turned out he paid it off using his $401k. Had a co-worker with 5 kids who could all go to USC for free once he has worked there for 15 years, even if he quit. He quit at 14.5 years for a job that barely paid more than he made at USC. Cost all 5 kids a free education at a top school since he couldn't wait 6 more months. Generational bag fumble. Ran up credit card debt requiring bankruptcy. Once they were able to build credit again, 7 years later, they proceeded to run up a massive amount of debt again, but couldn't go bankrupt again, so they used debt consolidation. The debt didn't come from sudden expenses. They just needed to buy things to feel better. You have to respect someone's dedication to bad choices to wait 7 years and run it right back. My co-worker has 25k in anime figurines. He is in mega debt right now. When my ex and I lived together, he suddenly got super into figurines and model kits, to the point where our living room was full of them. On every surface. At one point I counted and he had bought more than 30 over the span of 6 or so months. The math worked out to him spending about $300 a week on these things. Thing is, we were both full-time students. He was paying for these with student loans. And I had to drive him around because he couldn't afford a car. But he could somehow afford these model kits and figurines and DoorDash for every meal. He even tried to keep living with me when I broke up with him because he couldn't afford to move either. I had no sympathy at that point. Deleted. My so's father did this, sold his business to an employee for $1 to hide it during his divorce. And was shocked when suddenly, the guy didn't magically give it back. He lost his entire business and inventory for $1. He was an abusive asshole, so couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. My friend bought a used Hellcat Challenger yesterday at 10.5% April and $380 no insurance. He lives in my other friend's spare room. Time to move in the car. My former sister-in-law had a thriving medical practice. She got so stressed that she joined the Scientologist and started taking their classes. She opened up 5-6 credit cards without telling my brother, maxed the cards out with hundreds of thousands in cash withdrawals, and gave it to that cult. Yeah, but did she rid herself of her harmful body thetans? Edit, I fix the spelling of the invented magical beings to align with the great L. Ron Hubbard's true intentions. Worked with a 50-year-old guy who looked like the arse end of a rhino and hated anyone not from England who sent £10k to his fiancée in Thailand he'd never met for a boob job, clothes and flight over. Oddly enough, her naked pics and promises of anal when she visited stopped once the money had been sent. We had to talk to one of our employees a couple of weeks ago about something like this. He's not the best looking or most intelligent guy, but he's a nice guy. Apparently he met a girl online who lives in Atlanta. We saw her Facebook page and you could tell something was fishy. She was this smoking hot blonde with only like 4 pictures, all in skimpy tops and lingerie. No other posts on her page, just pictures. She told him she was single and had no family. They had all passed away. He decided a week after meeting her that he was gonna quit his job and move to Atlanta to live with her and help her rent an apartment. Us fellow employees and his family kept telling him it was a scam or catfish and not to go through with it. He got pissed and apparently had suicidal thoughts and checked himself into a mental hospital for a couple of days, but eventually he agreed and didn't go through with it. My awful aunt was the trustee for my grandparents' estate. When they passed, she decided to sell their house to a random realtor who put a leaflet on the door. To the realtor, not with the realtor. It wasn't put on the market, and the aunt rejected a matching offer by me after I argued hard to actually list the house and have people bid on it. The realtor slapped a new coat of paint on it and sold it a couple of months later for literally $1 million more than she bought it for. Ian, but she breached her fiduciary duty and you could have taken her to court for it. Edit, the aunt not the realtor. Many decisions around new tattoos or dogs when they can't pay rent regularly. My aunt says the rich get richer and the poor get another dog. I find this to be true for some of my family. I deal with these people regularly in my job. Can't pay the rent, and have of debt on car finance, payday loans, and credit cards. Go on to IVAs, payment plans where a private company pays off and consolidates their debts. The repayments are often unaffordable in the long term. They'll still go on holidays abroad or have very expensive mobile phone and Sky packages. At some point, you run out of options to help them keep their home. I worked with one customer whose rent arrears went from £1k to over £8k in a year. She's being evicted now. She could have prevented it if she'd followed the advice and taken the help she was given. Deleted. People way overestimate the selling powers of influencers. Apply for a 5k loan. Didn't accept quick enough, so applied for another 5k loan. Both got accepted and ended up gambling it all. Okay, but did they win is the real question. A guy I dated for a short time had been joining a MLM scheme selling insurances. I listened to his monologue and told him I had no money. He was furious and tried to sell insurance to our waiter at the restaurant. He failed again. I'm still laughing today. He was no good guy. Him. HRM. My date can't afford my pitch. Who are notoriously rich. Perfect. A waiter. I bought a Hellcat when my old badass Challenger was paid off. Thank you for your service. My cousin spent 100% of her inheritance and took out a lien on her home to buy a second home in the mountains. Thing is, it was being pushed over by a mountain, and they thought they could fix it. I went and seen it, and every door jamb was crooked and the doors wouldn't shut. They took me down into the basement and they were trying to use I-beams to stop the mountain from pushing on the home. I was just like, what the hell are you doing? That won't solve anything. Fast forward 6 months and they asked me for 50k to help and I declined. Fast forward a year and the home collapsed and now they owe over 300k plus for a home that doesn't exist, and if they don't make the payments they lose their other house too because they use the original home as collateral and could not get insurance on the second home. Total money lost upwards of 700k. This bothers me so much. I trust no deal and no one. I need to make sure everything is on order, and this just goes up my spine. Whoever sold that to them dodges a bullet and found a sucker. Knew someone who answered those scam emails thinking they would get rich. Last I heard, he lost around $50k. Emptied out savings account and maxed out credit cards. Left in debt and had to move back with ailing parents. Not a close to the mat hole, but more like a friend of a friend of a friend's cousin. Motherfucker just would not listen. Genuinely thought he was going to be a millionaire. They kept stringing him along until the bitter end, and then, poof. Biggest concern his friends had was him trying to milk his ailing parents for their last nickel and dime. Fortunately, he wised up and knew he'd been had. The last I heard of him was he had an hourly job somewhere and trying to get out of debt. This is why everyone should have played RuneScape in 2007. Get scammed for your virtual currency, folks, and learn your lesson. My brother and his wife were in massive debt. Didn't work high-paying jobs and could no longer afford their 2-bedroom apartment while trying to pay off the debt. They moved back home, into our parents' basement. A week before they moved in, they built a computer, and a year after that, they consciously decided to try to get pregnant, which they did, while still living in the basement and knowing they haven't improved their financial state whatsoever. Your poor parents. Now they won't be able to kick them about because of the kid. Extravagant weddings that end in divorce a year later. Supposedly there was a study that looked at the $sign spent on weddings and the length of the marriage. The more spent on the wedding, the shorter the marriage. I've never actually seen the study, so it may just be one of those internet fallacies. Sending a televangelist money for a blessing and then not having enough to rent a moving truck. So I had to be the blessing. They won thousands of dollars and bought a new entertainment system instead of getting current on their mortgage. Foreclosed on later that year. The thing was, The area had recently become the new it area for young families, and housing prices had skyrocketed. They easily could have just sold the house, paid cash for a larger house 20 minutes up the road, and still had tens of thousands left over. Where's the TV now? Cashed in their $401k to have a cocaine party. How was it? This older lady worked part-time in my kitchen. It was a fine dining, fast-paced environment. She would only work about 20 hours per week doing busy work, peeling vegetables, washing produce, etc. Tasks I knew she could handle and wouldn't get overwhelmed. Unfortunately, her husband passed away and she requested a few months off. I totally understood and said, take all the time you need. Let me know when you feel comfortable coming back to work, if at all. Take care, Barbara. 8 months later she contacted me for a job. I was more than willing to have her back in my kitchen. I nonchalantly asked her how she was coping with her loss. She broke down in tears. She apparently got a $500,000 insurance payout from her husband's death. Within those months she attempted to open a restaurant and sink every dime into the establishment. It went out of business in 6 months. She was now broke as an elderly lady having to go back to work. This hurts. Did she think her time as a prepper was sufficient knowledge to open a restaurant? Neighbors. The bread earner died. Her sister and her daughter were left with the place. They could not afford the payments. They would not sell. They let it go to foreclosure even though it had about $120,000 equity in it. New owners came in, did very little cosmetic work, just a little paint and fixed the fence. They sold it and made a $200k profit in about 6 months. My dad worked for the UN and built up quite a good pension while he worked there. A good $400k. He left the UN in his mid to late 50s. Instead of looking for new work after leaving, he decided to move back to Venezuela, his home country, and just relax for a while. During this sabbatical, his wife and her family talked my dad into putting almost his whole pension into a single stock with her stockbroker nephew. The stock was Venezuelan oil stocks. Maybe you have an idea how volatile the Venezuelan economy is, and how high inflation is there. It's a bad situation. But still, my dad did the thing and at first it was okay. But then it wasn't. Predictably, the nephew lost my dad's entire nest egg. The nephew ended up ghosting my dad and his wife. At this point, my dad tried to find new work, but because he was so close to retirement age he couldn't find anything decent. So my dad, a PhD graduate who worked at a decently high level at the UN, ended up having to clean houses for money. My dad had his own company and someone told him it made financial sense that instead of paying himself wages, he should take out a loan from his company. He built up debt for 3 years, while working full-time, rather than paying himself. It had all sorts of bad tax effects. Like he was required to pay interest on this, which was then taxed as profit of the company, then he paid himself again paying income taxes. It took him about 10 years to get out of that hole. Then he needed to sell his house because it was too expensive. But the buyer got cold feet on the last day before the sale. Rather than having the buyer pay 10% of the price to get out of the sale, he gave him an extension without an end date. The buyer then took 2 years to think about whether he wanted the house. All the while my parents needed to keep paying the mortgage and couldn't sell the house to anyone else because of the contract they had with that guy. Brought them close to bankruptcy. I've personally paid a couple of $100 a month to let them pay for the mortgage during that time. If I learned anything from the internet is that you never want to be the nice guy when your life depends on it. Retirement age person emptied out their $401k to open a pet store. To make matters worse, a family-run business with a lot of resentment and infighting. 5 years later, no more pet store. I've seen people turn down raises because they didn't understand how taxes worked. This is a constant thing in the building industrial trades regarding overtime. I've heard guys turn down a Sunday shift paying double time because it's all going to Uncle Sam if I work too many hours, very unaware of how the progressive tax system works. My neighbor proudly telling me he bought 6 Trump NFTs. Fair is broke AF, using what little savings he had on that BS. 21-yo living in dad's basement paycheck to paycheck went to a reptile exhibit and brought home 2 exotic frogs and a snake, because they didn't have enough money for a bearded dragon. How is someone living paycheck to paycheck without rent or mortgage? When someone is struggling financially, they inevitably believe the solution is to get an auto loan. On a related note, anyone who buys a car from Drive Time. They took out a small title loan and lost a $15K car in the process. I didn't know this was a thing until I was at a small, locally owned pawn shop looking at guns. The guy had a car for sale out front and I asked for more details about the car. He goes, "I don't know anything about it." Upon further discussion I found out it was a title loan and he tried to be the nice guy and help these people out. Push came to shove and he repoed the car. Don't do title loans, people. Someone took a loan to order a pizza. When I started college in 2006, local businesses were offering free pizzas if you signed up for certain credit cards. More people than I would have guessed did it because free food. When my grandmother's second husband, who I know as my grandpa, died, she spent nearly all $50K of his life insurance money on a South African scammer who promised her romance and more money than she gave. She refused to listen to family telling her to stop. She subverted efforts by her own bank to stop her frequent questionable money transfers. Eventually my parents had to close her bank account to force her to stop blowing my grandfather's money. I will never not resent her ignorance, selfishness, and inability to listen to anyone but herself. When I was 19, I went to Miami with some friends on Cinco de Mayo. We got insanely drunk and went bar hopping across the city. The next morning I looked at my transactions and realized I had spent over $1,000. Relatively speaking, this is a very cheap way to have learned this lesson. You did yourself a solid. I work at a casino, so I constantly see the pathetic depths people will sink to. Especially the high rollers who will just casually lose 10K in 15 minutes. It's insane to me. But they can at least, probably, afford it. It's the average income people who will continue to empty their bank accounts in hopes of digging themselves out of a deep hole. Or the ones who don't know when to stop and lose everything they just won. The saddest places I've ever been outside of funerals and hospitals have been casinos. I don't gamble, but I've been on the floor of a few of them over the years, and the depression and broken dreams are as thick as the smoke in the air. Anyone enlisted in the military buying a Charger or Mustang at astronomical interest rates. That shit is predatory and should be illegal in all 50 states. My new wife Cinnabon said it was a good deal, though. She's dancing her way through school. Friend spent $50K plus on Twitch donations because he went through a hard time and was looking for acceptance. Really messed his finances up for a long time. Edit, the money was all on credit cards. Maybe if I'd give this stranger money they'll love me. I used to be a car sales guy, and I watched as someone traded in their 6-month-old $95,000 pickup truck for $70,000 just to buy the exact same $95,000 truck. Literally, it was the same truck. The only difference was that the new truck had a gun safe. I told the guy we could install a gun safe for $2,000. It would have been the exact same gun safe in the exact same place. Guy added an additional $20,000 in debt for a gun safe. But hey, I got to make a $95,000 sale. Well, you were honest and he still didn't listen. Lucky you. An 80s used car salesman's dream. So many MLMs, so many, and they never listen. It's like some kind of wall goes up. A co-worker got fired, destroyed his marriage, while trying to make it as some MLM stooge. To give you an idea how bad it was for long distance cards to Hispanic countries in an era when cell phones were taking off and long distance as a concept was evaporating. He lost tens of thousands. I bought a Yeti soft cooler. Could have had 2 Rotic soft coolers. My dad sold his car to someone so he could buy more crack while on a bender. Edit, wording grammar. About 20 years ago my stepbrother sold a running 78 Cadillac Seville that looked good, ran well, with a clean title, for $50, because he wanted booze money. He never got better at things. Great drama, though. Timeshare. I'll raise you. Timeshare in a place no one wants to vacation. Example, ski slopes in late spring, warm weather. How they convinced her to buy, you can pass down this timeshare to your grandkids as their inheritance. Cheated on 7 years of back taxes, got like 20k in returns, then they were surprised they got audited. Last I heard they moved away to try and run from it lol. An uncle fell for one of those income taxes and constitutional pitches a while back. Of course the IRS eventually explained to him that he had to pay it. Took his finances over a decade to recover. Someone makes the decision to have a baby to keep the relationship. They had neither a house nor job. To have a baby isn't cheap.